In this video, I wanted to discuss a couple of papers that I found when I was researching and preparing to do a lecture on tumor biology a few years ago. This first one is called "A Cancer Theory Kerfuffle Can Lead to New Lines of Research," and it starts as saying the standard viewpoint that cancer is a genetic disease is often stated as fact rather than theory. By not acknowledging that it is indeed a theory, namely the somatic mutation theory, researchers are limiting their progress. Okay, so what is the somatic mutation theory? So the somatic mutation theory is the commonly accepted theory of how cancers form, and if you ask doctors and cancer researchers, 99.9% of them will say that this is how cancers form. And when you read college textbooks, they tell you that this is the case. So, if you read this college biology textbook, it says cancers result from genetic changes that affect the cell cycle. So this idea is that cancers are the result of mutations in your genes, and these mutations alter the behavior of the cell and cause them to have unregulated growth and then unregulated movement and invasion, and that cancer is a genetic disease. It's caused by a mutation. So that is the commonly accepted theory, and most people, that is the only theory they've ever been taught, and that's the theory that's accepted and is known by most doctors and scientists. But these couple of papers I found have kind of an interesting alternative theory on how cancers form, and I thought that it was worthwhile to kind of go over this this theory. And this theory is called the tissue organization field theory. So let's see. This is a little table in this paper that tells you what the differences are. So the hallmarks of cancer are that there's unregulated growth, it invades tissue, and it moves, it metastasizes. And the people that posit this Toft theory, they say, well, that's exactly how the body reacts or behaves during development. During development in embryology, your cells grow rapidly, they invade other tissues, and they move throughout your body. And so they're saying that, so in this table, between the two, they say that somatic mutation theory says that it's a genetic disease and it focuses on the cancer cell. Toff says that basically cancer is development that's gone awry. So it's kind of development, cells acting like during the embryologic phase when they shouldn't be, and it focuses on the interaction of the tissues. In the somatic mutation theory says that mutations are what are needed for the cancer to develop. So the mutation causes the cancer. Toff theory says that you don't need mutations for cancer, and that genetic instability, the mutations are a byproduct of the cancer. So the mutations happen after the cancer forms because the cancer is growing and is no longer repairing their DNA. So adjacent tissue or the tumor microenvironment, somatic mutation theory says that it affects the fitness of the clone. So the adjacent tissue supports the cancer, and the cancer recruits these supporting cells, these stromal cells. The Toff theory says that cancer rises from disruption of interaction with adjacent tissues. And then somatic mutation theory says that the mutagen or the carcinogen affects the cell, and that cell gets mutated and then becomes the cancer. Toff says that you can expose cells to the mutagen and you can have cancers arise in a different cell. So these are kind of very different thought processes on how cancer develops. And this paper gives a couple of reasons why the Toff theory may be true. And my personal take is it's probably, this theory sounds reasonable, and it probably is true for some forms of cancer, and the somatic mutation theory is probably true for some forms of cancer, because cancer, like we said in the previous video, is not a monolithic disease. Cancer is many different kinds of diseases, and there's probably different ways that different cancers develop. So one interesting finding is that when we sequence tumors, the tumors are not clonal. They have different mutations throughout the tumor. So if the tumor started from one cell that became the original cancer cell, a reasonable expectation would be all the cancer cells share the same mutation, but that is not the case. Now, people that are proponents of the somatic mutation theory, they say that as tumors develop, they get more mutations and they become polyclonal. So there's an explanation for most of these problems that they mention in here. Then hereditary cancers. This paper mentions that there's a disease called xeroderma pigmentosa, which these patients have a genetic DNA repair defect, and what happens is they have very high rates of skin cancer. But interestingly, even though they have this same DNA repair defect in all cells, they have normal rates of all other kinds of cancers, which you would think that if they had DNA repair defects, it would cause other cancers as well. And there's another very similar disease called Cockayne syndrome, which they also have a genetic repair defect, but they have normal rates of skin cancer. And then there's some transgenic experiments where some experiments deleted a driver gene in the progenitor cells, and then the resultant cancer did not have the deleted gene. So that's weird because the deleted gene is thought to be the driver of the cancer, and it disappeared. And then they mention in this case that there's an enzyme called BCR-ABL, which is the driver gene in chronic myelogenous leukemia, and that was one of the things that really supported the somatic mutation theory, is finding this driver gene. But they mentioned that the population rapidly disappears when they grow it in culture, and you would think that the driver gene, the cancer gene, would overtake the normal genes. So that's a little unusual. This is the thing I found actually the most interesting, actually, is this foreign body carcinogenesis. And what they found out is evidently there were these experiments where they implanted paper filters into mice, and the paper filters caused cancer. And paper filters should not be carcinogenic. They don't cause mutations. And what was weird is that when they changed the size of the pores of the paper filters, they had different rates of tumor growth, which makes absolutely no sense if you subscribe to the somatic mutation theory, because why would the size of the pores change the rate of cancer development? Then they also mentioned that there's some carcinogens, such as chloroform and p-dichlorobenzene, which don't damage DNA but cause cancer. So they're not mutagens, but they are carcinogens. Then they have another experiment where when they denervate, which they cut the nerve in certain mice, then their rates of cancer growth is different based on the nerve supply, which would not make sense if cancer was a genetic disease caused by a somatic mutation. And then this is a very interesting experiment where basically they took fat from the mammary glands of rats, and what they did is they exposed the fat pad to a carcinogen. Okay, look, let's read this carefully. So they removed the mammary epithelium from the rats, then they exposed the epithelium-free stromal fat pad to carcinogen or no carcinogen. Okay, so breast cancer comes from the epithelium, the lining of the glandular tissue of the breast, and so they removed that and they just had the fat pad. Then they separately exposed the epithelium to either carcinogen or non-carcinogen. So basically, if the cancer is caused by a mutation, you would expect that the carcinogen exposed to the epithelium would cause cancer, and then exposing the fat to the carcinogen would give you a fat tumor, but not an epithelial tumor. But what they found out is that when they exposed the fat, that gave them cancer in the epithelium, which doesn't make sense under the somatic mutation theory. So that's very interesting. And then they also found out that basically when they sequenced a lot of tumors, they found a lot of tumors that have no mutations that they found by sequencing it. So these are the two people that started this tissue organization field theory of cancer. They work at Tufts University, and this is their paper. And they basically go through, very similar findings. Let's see. Let's go down. Okay, yeah. So they talk about spontaneous regression of neuroblastoma. So neuroblastoma is a very common childhood cancer that spontaneously regresses often, and so that spontaneous regression should not happen if it's a mutated cancer cell that's causing it. But there's a fairly high rate of spontaneous regression of this neuroblastoma, which the Toff theory people say that this is because the development normalizes. And then there's several experiments where you take cancer cells and then you inject them into normal tissues, and these cancer cells revert to normal anatomy. So the cancer cells have mutations, but when you put them in normal tissue, they revert to normal anatomy. And then this is that foreign body carcinogenesis again. So very interesting. These are things that don't make sense with the somatic mutation theory. And so there's probably some cancers for which this theory makes sense. And then this is another group, and they have a similar, they don't call it the TOF, but they have a similar problem with the somatic mutation theory, saying that the somatic mutation theory does not give a good answer or good treatment regimens for most cancers. And they say that that cancer originates from this following sequence of events, which means they have some kind of stimulus that causes chronic inflammation, for which develops fibrosis and changes in the microenvironment, and that causes the cancer. So it's basically this chronic inflammation driving changes in the tissue that cause cancer, rather than a mutation in the genes. So anyways, I just thought that was a really interesting theory that I had not heard of before until I kind of ran into these papers a couple of years ago. The somatic mutation theory, like I said, is the accepted form, is accepted theory of carcinogenesis. And if you ask almost anyone, how do cancers form, they're going to tell you it's caused by a gene or multiple genes that are mutated that unregulate cancer the cellular growth and invasion and metastasis. But there are several experimental findings that are outlined in these papers that are really hard to explain under that theory. So it is, I think, good to keep our minds open about different theories of how cancers form. If you have any questions, please comment below, and I'll try to answer them if I can. I thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed learning about this kind of unusual theory.